so completely outside their whole paradigm concept that just start by using less money, using less stuff, and just see how much you really need. When people use the word need in place of want a lot of times, and what they really need to decipher is those things, and you'll find out you need almost nothing. There's the George Carlin skit about having your big house and your car, and then you take a vacation and you got it in a suitcase, and then you go for a day hike and you got a little knapsack and your lunch, and you sit down on top of the mountain and you go, wow, this is really all I need.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I had a thought and I lost it.
I was talking about getting to no money by first going to less money.
I feel like this isn't beyond reach for anybody. Like, I feel like everybody already lives without money. Like, every day, every time we do something, expecting nothing in return, just out of the instinct of our heart, we are living without money and we are an anarchist. That's like a phrase I've heard, like everybody's an anarchist at heart. Our families work that way, our friendships. It's like we're always doing, whether consciously or subconsciously, accepting freely and giving freely. And I feel like if we cultivate what's already here, not thinking of some future utopia, some future moneyless society or past Eden, but cultivate what's already here, all of the other nonsense would drop away if we just cultivate our true selves, which is without ulterior motivation.
You've had your hand up.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between faith and fear, and how, to me, that would be a hugely fearful thing to set my money down and decide the universe is going to take care of me? How do you push through that kind of fear?
Can people hear that back there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The faith and fear. Yeah, I feel like basically the definition of faith is no fear.
Mm-hmm.
And we think of faith as a set of beliefs, a creed. But I see faith as trust. It's like trusting that everything will work out. And it is difficult. And I find myself struggling with it some days. Some days I get into a point of anxiety, thinking, like especially when I've been hitchhiking on the road and I have no money, or I have no food with me or anything, and I have no idea where my next meal is going to come from. I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and this happened several times, and these feelings of anxiety would come over me. I think, wow, I must be nuts doing this. And then I think, well, I guess today is going to be the first day that I fast, and because I see no way on earth how it's going to work out, and then I feel this anxiety, and it's like knotting me up, and then I catch myself and I think, oh, and I sit with it, just sit with it and observe it. And then you see where it's coming from. Just observe it until you see where it's coming from. And then I think, wow, how long have I been doing this and everything's been working out? Why all of a sudden am I anxious today? And even if it didn't work out today, like how many weeks can a human live without food? And it's no problem. In fact, it's healthy to fast. Like, why am I so hung up on this meal today? And it's finally when I let that go, and it doesn't have to be about food either. It's like rides, like hitchhiking or whatever. It's like, wow, nobody's going to pick me up and I'm going to be stuck here forever. Or I start, like, thousands of cars going by on an interstate, and then I start getting cynical and angry, like at each person. It's, and I'm like, not yet. I'm no longer using this finger, but this, And then when this finger starts going up, then I realize it's time to stop. It's time to go and sit down and find out where this is coming from. And then I realize it's all a mind thing again. It's just in my mind, and it's about not being in the present moment, thinking I have to get somewhere else. Something else is better than here. And even in the most vile places by an interstate, it's like I'll sit and I'll think, okay, it doesn't matter. This is the perfect place in the world to be. This is where I'm going to be, even if I have to be here for a week. This is where I have to be content. And when I finally let it go, I don't know how many times this has happened. Like I'll go back to the road, stick my thumb out, somebody will stop immediately, Or with the food situation, as soon as I let it go, I think it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if I eat or not. And then invariably, it's almost like for the split second that I let it go, somebody stops and they'll say, hey, do you want, like one time some bicycles came by and said, hey, do you want some almond butter? They give me a jar of almond butter. It's like,
can I give you an example of that in America? Because I've had it happen.
Hold on a minute, man. I love your questions, and I'm going to buy you a beer afterwards and we can answer, but all these hands are jumping up, and I want everyone to get a chance. Is that cool? Yes.
So I had read Planet Walker, which you might have heard of, about, what's his name, John Francis, yeah, who walked everywhere without cars for quite a long time. And something you said when you were first talking that when you saw him in the grocery store, you felt like it was a threat to your life choices. And John Francis talks about a similar thing where he got some really aggro people who are like, think just because he doesn't want to use cars anymore, that's like a threat to their decision to use cars. And people get really either vulnerable or just feel threatened by that. And if you could just speak to why you think some people respond to your decisions, or other people who choose to step out of the box a little bit in that way. And, if you've seen that or if you have any insight.
well, I think that's what's ingenious about Mark's first chapters. He was honest about his own feelings. Just like I find myself that way at times. Like I'll look at a homeless person and this judgment will go through my head, and then I'll stop and remind myself, oh yeah, I'm a homeless person. But also, I feel like that principle of feeling judged, it is like a mirror to ourselves. Like if you're at like alcoholics who are in denial might feel judged by someone who refuses a drink, or somebody who eats meat might feel threatened by a vegetarian. Because it does. Like, there's no better way to get somebody to think about their way of life than just by example. And the phrase judge not that you be not judged, when you think about that, it's really profound. It's like to judge and to be judged are one and the same. Like if I feel like somebody's judging me, I'm judging them to be judging me. They might not have an inkling of judgment in them, but if I feel judged, maybe it's me judging myself.
And the reason I added that, or the reason I started the book that way, is because I've been reading all these blogs about people commenting about Daniel in the comment threads, and people are just vicious, and they're so angry, and they say the completely like false, libelous things about him, and they so often indicate like that they're feeling judged or threatened. And I had to admit that I had felt the same way, you know, back before I was getting a book contract to write about him. Like, that was my judgment. It was like, oh, I don't talk to you. And he presses those buttons on a lot of people by his mere existence. I mean, if you're a Christian, and you know that you're not actually like going out and sitting with the poor and the wretched and like loving them as your neighbor, it's kind of threatening to see someone actually doing it. Or if you're a good tax-paying liberal, and you know that, you know, your tax money is going into the bureaucracy and coming out the other end as a food stamp for someone in a different state, you know that you're not really giving from your heart to that person. You know, it's not like you got to invite the person in your house and feed them. And so I think hanging out with Daniel, you become aware of that. Or for that matter, if you're like a conservative who's like, I don't believe in government. I want small government. I want the government out of my religious affairs. I don't want to have to be forced charity. And then here's some guy saying like, I don't believe in government at all. And I mean, how many conservatives are really going to say, okay, this is what we should do then, is all go live in caves because and not have government? So it causes people to realize the sort of like middle of the road of their beliefs. It caused me to realize that. It caused me to realize, wow, I've been talking about Thoreau and Gandhi for my whole life, you know, and here I am just like in my little castle. Who's got another question? Ooh, you.
So you've gone through this process of like renouncing money in this monetary system. What about like on like a philosophical level of like something of a time bank or a barter system on like large scale society? What are your thoughts on how that could function within like society?
Yeah, I think those are like anything, any alternative that gets people thinking of a different way of living, I feel like is good. And there are time banks, like I think it was Estonia. I heard that it's even sanctioned by the government in Estonia. Somebody could correct me if they know. But this time bank thing is a big thing there. But bottom line, for me personally, I don't even subscribe to conscious barter. I would like to see us move beyond money and barter. I think it's a good step, but in my mind, they're the same thing. Money is just a more convenient form of barter, so you're not carrying around a bunch of stuff, but the motivations are basically the same, except the good thing about barter is it puts people into physical contact, whereas money, you can have interactions with people without ever seeing them. But this goes back to what I was saying about nature and observing nature, and this especially became a revelation to me in Alaska, just watching animals and myself. Like, I was foraging, like experimenting with living off the land, and I camped near a raspberry bush and started eating the raspberries, especially on this one bush near my tent. And I noticed that bush, out of all of them, the raspberries kept getting redder and plumper as time went on, like the bush was encouraging me to eat more. And I actually felt this communication with this raspberry. And the communication was through color and taste and smell. And you know, when you think about a bear like eating the raspberry, he'll take the plumpest, reddest ones, and they pull off easily from the bush, whereas the non-ripe ones don't. The raspberry is saying, "Eat me," and the bear eats it, has no sense of obligation whatsoever to the raspberry bush. He's not thinking, "Wow, what do I owe this bush? Do I have to trade anything?" And the bush isn't saying, "Now you owe me." It's giving freely. And the bear walks on. He probably totally forgot about the bush. He goes on and then he poops. And his poop becomes food for organisms in the soil. And not only that, he's pooping out the raspberry seeds and propagating them for the bush. He doesn't even know it. And these bushes are growing here. And then we ask, well, how does it work? Okay, how does the raspberry bush get what it needs in return? And that's the point, not knowing. As soon as we start worrying about credit and debt, like is there like an accountant sitting there by the bush saying, okay, let's work out the balance here. The point is giving up consciousness of credit and debt, which includes barter. Like, how many animals do you ever see haggling over anything? And barter happens and trade happens, but it's out of our hands. And this is where people would say I get religious, because I would say it's in the hands of God or in the hands of the universe. Like the whole idea of vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord, you know. You could say, well, the universe will take care of credit and debt. And I feel like the worldwide myth, it's in various forms all over the world, of stealing fire from heaven. It's every culture's explanation of what has separated us from the balance of nature, what separated us from grace. And we've taken this consciousness of credit and debt from the gods, from heaven, and made it our own. And now all of a sudden we're separated from the grace of nature. And in our own myth, in our own culture, it's the Garden of Eden story. All of a sudden what only belonged to heaven became ours. Consciousness of credit and debt, or knowledge of good and evil, putting values, this is good, this is evil, when in the beginning all was good. Now we're like saying this is valuable, this is not. This is good, this is evil. And you find this concept in the Bhagavad Gita, in Hinduism. You work without consciousness of credit and debt. Like the main theme of the Bhagavad Gita is to work renouncing the fruit of your labor. Don't even think about rewards, credit. And that, basically this is about credit, not really money. Money is just a manifestation of this concept, and that's ego. Whenever I do something for credit, whether it's praise, and they all come from the same kinds of roots, like praise comes from the word price, or they both come from the same root, price, and prostitution, and credit. And I would also say that the most perfect economy, and we see it all around us. I don't really like talking about abstract ideas like future utopia or past Eden. I feel like it's all here and we can see it if we just open our eyes to it. Nature all around us is in a perfect balance, and it's a pay-it-forward system. That's the perfect economy. And you contrast it with our economies in commercial civilization. Like, what nation on earth can really balance its budget, much less its environment, with our PhD economists? And like, the more we try to balance, the more we stumble. And this principle is even in like a martial artist or dancer or anybody who has a skill, riding a bike. We understand this principle. When we try to balance, we stumble. When we just give up and trust, then we go into balance. Tai Chi. Like, your right hand doesn't know what your left hand is doing because you're centered on your chi. It's all across the board, it's the same principle, and that's faith.
Yes, over here.
So, I understand your motivations for renouncing money and for your lifestyle. So many of us are built around money as our motivator. I mean, that's why we wake up in the morning when we do. That's why we drink as much coffee as we do. That's why we do so many. That's why we drink as much beer as we do, because we know we have to get up and do the whole thing again tomorrow. What is your driving motivator in life? I'm very curious. I mean, maybe to expand, why are you here? Why did you go to Alaska? Why do you do all the things that you do?
Fun. And it's the same thing that motivates children and animals. It's like you watch animals. We have this dichotomy between work and play in our minds. But you watch nature, not nature flicks on TV. You turn on the nature flick, and it's like civilization's propaganda, like, oh, it's a struggle for survival, and the music. It's like, oh, and that's what people thought about the hunting and gathering tribe, like the Dobie Kung in South Africa. For years, centuries, people would say, oh, these poor people, they're living in poverty, they sleep in the dust, they're scraping by for subsistence, they don't even have surface water in South Africa. They're just struggling. And then finally anthropologists went in and studied them and found that they spend more time in leisure than any other culture on Earth. Like the average 2 or 3 hours of work a day. And even that's not an accurate statement, because there's really no division between work and play. And then anthropologists compared notes like other hunting and gathering tribes around the world and found it was a similar pattern. And what's his name? Solons, he was an anthropologist. I think he wrote in the 60s or 70s a book about it, and one chapter was called The Original Affluent Society. And he was talking about hunting and gathering people are at a place where the top wealthiest supposedly are in our culture. The gentleman class spends most of its time in leisure. And except that they don't have the stresses and anxiety that the people at the top have. When you're maintaining money and possessions. I can't even remember what your original question was. Yeah, what motivates? Yeah, and I feel like it's what motivates everyone. Again, I'm thinking of another book I read, which I can't remember the title of it or the author. And if anybody's familiar with this psychologist professor was doing this experiment to see what motivates people. And he took his students, he had 3 sets of students with computer screens. And I forget how much he said, but he said, well, on the screen there's like a circle, and there's all these dots or something, forget exactly, but the principle is you have to get as many of these items into the circle as you can in 5 minutes or whatever. And for each item you get into the circle, the first group, they get like $5. The second group, they get 5 cents. And then the third group doesn't get anything. He just tells the third group, we need to do this, it's a community project for something. I can't remember. Basically, the idea was community. It's for the community. And naturally, the first group did a lot better than the second group. They got paid more. But the third group did better than all of them. And also, the same thing happened with there was a retirement community, and the people couldn't afford legal care or legal services. So he decided, well, let's set up a program where they can pay for him at reduced cost. And he tried to get all these lawyers involved. He advertised for it. Nobody would step up. Maybe one or two here and there. And then after that, they decided, okay, let's just make it totally free, pro bono. All of a sudden, all these lawyers step up. You know, so what motivates us? And I think we all know.
You had a question?
I was intrigued when you were talking about how if you're freaking out about getting a ride on the side of the road, or where is the next meal going to come from, or I'm thirsty or something, and you were talking, I think I understood you to say something like you examine where that anxiety is coming from, or wherever, whatever it is coming from, and then that allows it to dissipate as you examine the root of this concern. So then it led me to wonder if you have, and this is a little personal, but do you have wants beyond perhaps survival? Like, is there, and I'm just curious, are you able to kind of meditate them out? Like wants for personal relationships, or wants for, I'm not talking about like a 0-degree bag or something like that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's really the same exact principle. Like, yeah, I have wants that come up. Yeah, and then I meditate on them and find out where they're coming from, and they go away. Because the point of living this way is to have no wants. And, you know, I think about the old, you know, you hear it on Hollywood television, the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And I think there is a profound principle there, and it's the principle of Buddhism too. The want and lack are the same thing. That's, want is the old English word for lack. I shall not lack. And whether we're talking about relationships or frustration at the side of the road, or hunger, or thinking I want some, what I find is my discontent is it's not in the present moment. It's not in the reality of present circumstances. It's in my mind thinking of what could be better. Like if I'm uncomfortable, I realize, well, my discomfort isn't really in what is happening right now. It's thinking of what could be more comfortable. So my mind is not in the present, it's in the future. And that's the point of meditation. Just to see reality for what it is and stop seeing ideas in the head.
Thank you.
I was worrying about your teeth.
Me too.
And I was thinking, you know, you're saying you recoiled when you saw the bad teeth, and I'm thinking that must have hurt. Having bad teeth, if it's abscesses, that hurts. I mean, were you in a situation where you were in pain and couldn't get relief because of not having money?
Well, actually, at that point, my teeth weren't hurting at all. I had broken teeth. I still do in the front. And Mark mentions this later on in the book, that I actually broke my teeth back when I had a respectable job, and I went to a go-karting place with a friend. I paid for it, and we had a little go-kart accident, and I broke out my teeth. That was many years before I gave up money, but I didn't have dental insurance, and it would have cost, like the dentist told me, that it would take surgery to build up my gums and whatever. It would be thousands and thousands of dollars, so I thought, oh, forget it. But later on, after I gave up money, I did develop a cavity. Actually, I developed 2 cavities. The first one, I had an abscess that happened, and for about 2 days it was excruciating pain, and then I put pinion sap in it, and like the pain went away, and I just kept packing it with pinion sap. But finally that tooth rotted out and came out. then I got another cavity a couple years later, and I mentioned it to my parents, and they said, well, Don Adams, that goes to our church, my parents' church, he's worked with people for, ever since he became a dentist, done free dental work, like overseas and in Grand Junction, the homeless population. He does it for free. He expects nothing in return. And that was perfect for me, because my philosophy is to only accept what's freely given. And I don't even like taking charity, like if people are paid to do it. It's like if the individual health practitioner offers it freely, I'll take it. So he fixed my teeth, and I felt very grateful. But also, this whole idea of health comes up. This is a question that comes up every single time in these talks. And I address it on this website with FAQs too, but it's also about accepting the laws of natural selection, which I also feel is faith. On the one hand, it's natural selection, and on the other hand, and it's still the same thing, it's all nature. It's like it's natural for us to help each other. It's natural for us to take care of the aged and the sick, but it's also natural to let go when we know it's time to go. And I decided, like, maybe I'll break my leg in a canyon somewhere, and I'll be far away from civilization, and maybe I'll hobble around for a couple days, maybe I'll die. And I think, well, so what? It's like creatures have been dying for zillions of years, and what did we do before money came on the scene for zillions of years? And I remember back when I did work for money, I worked in a couple different hospitals drawing blood, and I'd go to the geriatric ward, and I would see old people with tubes in their arms, and most of them, I felt like they wanted to die, and their families would come in, and I felt like their family members wanted them to die, but some idea of morality, some dogma would keep them alive. And part of that is insurance companies and legal stuff. But I remember thinking, are we like standing there in the geriatric ward, I think, wow, are we any better off than chimpanzees? With all of our control and all of our great technology. And then you look at nature again, and this is stuff that, you know, it might be difficult, but it's stuff that I feel like we need to think about if we're going to progress. How often do you see, like if you look at a herd of deer, how often do you see a malnourished or an obese deer, or any wild animal for that matter? And then you look at human civilization, look at Somalia, and then the obesity in America. Look at our epidemic of mental illness. Look at violence. Look at our wars. Look at, it's all the same principle. Look at the environment. We're creating a toxic world, and the more we stress over health and money and security, the worse it gets. It's that same principle. The more we try to create balance, the worse it gets. The more, it's like trying to pull out a thorn in your flesh. The more you work at it, the deeper it goes. And then finally you give up, and then it festers and pops out by itself. And again, it's that faith thing.
I just want to add one thing. There's been so many really profound questions about faith and spirituality, and that's one of the, I'd say, the main reason Daniel's living like this. But as me coming into this book as a journalist, I was interested in that. But if I really thought that Daniel was just sitting in his cave, like getting enlightened, I probably wouldn't have been drawn to it. But the other element that really drew me in was this political part of it, this economic civil disobedience. And that was what made me think this is extremely relevant right now at this point in history. And what I mean by that is, since I've been working on this book, I think the three most important political movements to spring up are all coming to similar conclusions that Daniel's been talking about all along, that money is an illusion, and that this illusion is very powerful and very destructive. So let's take the Occupy movement. We're saying, government is in the chokehold of the financial system. Financial system robbed us all, like at a casino in 2008, and we couldn't put the handcuffs on them because they own the government. So this is a problem. On the right, you have the Tea Party saying that the Federal Reserve Bank is leading us down the road to serfdom because the money we make is monopoly money. They just create it out of nowhere and feed it to the citizens to make them placated. And that's what Daniel's been saying. Or you have more of a centrist movement would be the climate change movement, saying that we cannot seem to save this planet because the rights these corporations have to earn money trump our right to, a sustainable planet. And that's why these things are in court, because the corporations, in their defense, for the most part, aren't really breaking the law. They're just doing what our Constitution enables them to, is to pursue free enterprise and profit. Of course, some are breaking the law, but not all. And so all these groups are coming to this conclusion: wow, we've created this monster, and now it's ruling us, and we feel enslaved by it, and we feel powerless because we think, well, how can I complain about the Fed when I use money every day? And how can I complain about big oil when I drive a car every day? And how can I complain about Wall Street because I have my IRA account because I need that security as well? And so we've reached this point of like helplessness and passiveness because the thing is too big and we can't stop it, and we can't even imagine that there's another way of living because this is what we grew up with. I mean, people don't even understand. I didn't know that, charging more than 10% interest, which is common if you ever had a credit card, it's usually 18, 22%. That was illegal in America until 1980. I mean, that's already escaped our memory that used to be something that the government had the courage and the backbone to regulate. But now it's just like, oh, you want to borrow some money? Okay, pay 20%. That practice was banned by the Catholic Church for 1,000 years. And if you charged interest, you got excommunicated and you couldn't be buried in the Christian cemetery. So the point is, like, we think this is the only way to live, but it turns out it's not. People live other ways in different countries. In the past, they've lived different. In the future, they will live different. But what Daniel has done, which has inspired me, is saying, like, I'm not going to play. I'm not going to participate. He's like that guy in Tiananmen Square standing in front of the tank saying, like, I don't know what the future will look like, but I'm not going to just accept the system as it is. And as I've been doing this book tour, that's really been resonating with people, maybe people who aren't spiritual or religious or liberal or whatever. They're saying, oh wow, maybe there's another way to live that we hadn't thought of. So that's what drew me into this. Let's see.
How long have you been living like this? How long have you been living without money?
My last money in the fall of 2000. So 11 years, maybe 12 years this fall.
Diva.
I devoured this book in 24 hours, and I realized afterwards that one of the main characters is Moab, and that location and landscape really assists you, because if you were doing this in Newark, you would just be called homeless. And so and you talk about the Moab eddy, and we love the desert. We're here, but we're on the edge of it. You can see the red rock coming through. And so I just wanted to, say, or see what you think, as far as the chosen, the Southwest, and how it plays such a big part in this book for both of you, for different reasons.
Yeah, I thought that was, like, what Mark said in the book was really thought-provoking, like the major religions originated in the desert, and like if Jesus were up in the Northwest, he would be more concentrated on building a cabin and getting out of the cold, and we might not, same with the Buddha. But yeah, the desert, like Mark was pointing out, the desert gives you a feeling of our own mortality and the impermanence of ourselves, and yet the vastness, the permanence of the laws of the universe, and yet the impermanence of ourselves. You might even be able to explain that better. I thought it was pretty cool.
Well, you want me to?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, like say, the landscape really invites spiritual seeking. If you read Ed Abbey, like, the landscape is not a wasteland as it was thought of for a long time, but it's this sort of place for meditation, spiritual wondering, and feeling alive. And what that does is it creates a lot of little towns where you have a whole bunch of people who ran away from somewhere else and were drawn to this place, and there's sort of like an idea of reinventing society. And I think that you see that in a lot of these small towns in the mountains, in all the Four Corners states, in the deserts, in the canyons. And in Moab, certainly. I mean, you have the town of everyone who's like left. For the most part, people have left somewhere else. They went on this quest. They landed here. And now they're building a new world. And the people, I have a whole chapter about this food co-op that started in the late 70s. It no longer exists, but it was actually a food store where they didn't want to make any money. They wanted to give away the food at cost, or as low to cost as possible. And people could work there in exchange for credit and get food. And the guy who ran it didn't ever look at the book. It was all faith. Work here and take whatever you need. And it was actually a non-owned business. There was no legal owner to the business. And it was just like, it was this experiment in anarchy that absolutely worked for 20 or more years. And you find all sorts of stuff like that. I mean, you guys have here, they have the free box. And I don't think that stuff necessarily exists in the rest of the country. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that store you were talking about, Mark mentions that in the book. That was one of my stepping stones too, is working at that store. It was part of my weaning off of money.
I was wondering if your family has read the book, and if so, what type of dialogue has come from that?
I gave the book to my parents a few weeks ago, and I was worried because I was worried how they would take it, and they often don't comment on articles published about me, or much less the book. And I just found out the other night in Grand Junction.
That was last night.
Oh yeah, last night. Yeah, this whole conception of time is I have a hard time with. My parents came, and I felt very touched. And they made some comment to Mark that they had read the book. So I didn't really know if they had read it or not until last night. But all along, since I started, I felt quite supported by my parents. In the beginning, though, I had my doubts what they thought about it. Maybe they did too. like their philosophy is to, once their kids are adults, to keep out of their lives and keep their opinions to themselves. So they wouldn't say anything. Maybe once in a while my mom, like she'd point out one of my friends, like I have a friend who became a medical doctor, and another one a lawyer, and a couple others, school teachers, one of them a college professor, and she'd say, you know, I kind of would have been nice if you would have done something like that. But otherwise they'd keep quiet. And usually they don't, a lot of times if they disagree with something, they just don't say anything. You know, so I thought, well, they're not fully supportive. But as the years went by, even before the publicity stuff, they started volunteering comments of support and say, you know, the more we think about what you're doing, the more it makes sense to us. You know, and they think back on the Depression days. And also, they're both getting quite old. They're both 84, going on 85. And they'll say this too. They'll say, yeah, as we get older, we see how fleeting life is and what nonsense it is to build our fortresses on this impermanent earth. Build castles on crests of waves. And a couple of years ago, you know, I thought, well, maybe my parents are just saying that because they're trying to make me happy. You know, I'm too far gone anyway, so why convince me otherwise? And my dad invited me to one of his Bible studies. He used to teach this Bible study. Very conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical. And I said, okay. And I went, and partway through, he started bragging about me. He started saying, yeah, Daniel's living by faith. And, you know, and I felt really touched. It was like kind of choking back the tears.
I was really afraid when I went to interview his parents, because I knew that they were very conservative, fundamentalist, and also like sort of religious right in their political beliefs. And I just assumed they were going to think that their son was a complete failure and like be really judgmental and disappointed. And as it turned out, coming from fundamentalism, it was actually Daniel's life made more sense to them than it would to, say, my parents, who are a little more secular, a little more like, hey, are you going to go to a good college and get a good job and be a success? But when you spend your life kind of engaged in the Bible and you're talking about Jesus walking out into the desert and John the Baptist eating honey and locusts and living outside, stuff kind of doesn't seem all that strange.
I think also, like a lot of fundamentalists would be and have been very critical of what I do. But, and I think back when my dad was younger, when he was my age, he would have been more critical. In fact, I remember him saying like very judgmental things about people living like me. You know, but I also he was going back and forth in his mind. And I also remember as a kid, we were traveling across country, and there was a couple. There was a man and a woman, young, you know, dreadlocks, backpack. My dad said, I was pretty amazed. We were in the car at a gas station. He says, you know, I usually judge people like that, but deep down I envy them. You know, and but also my parents through the years have, like, I think my family's unusual in that my dad went from being very successful. He would go back and forth as we were growing up. Sometimes we'd be successful living in American suburbia. Then a few years later we'd be living in a trailer. You know, he had economic hard times and good times, swinging back and forth. And in the bad times, my parents would always say, the Lord provides. And every time, you know, when something went really bad, you know, it looked like my dad didn't know how they were going to pay the bills, like the next day or whatever. Like somebody would leave something on a doorstep or whatever. And that had a lot of influence on me. And there was a lot of, like, fundamentalism is really a strange thing. On the one hand, it can be very right-wing and bigoted, but and I didn't realize all this until I got older. It's just like we have to take the good and leave the bad in everything, and that's my roots. And I found I couldn't live fully if I tried to cut myself off from my roots.
So I think we need to end. It's been 2 hours.
It's been that long.
Yeah, but it's I've enjoyed it. But we're going to sign books if anyone wants to buy them, and we're going to answer more questions if you have one-on-one questions. But I think we should wrap it up, and then we're also going to go to the bar, right?
Last dollar.
Last dollar. So maybe one more question, and then we'll call it. Yes.
Have you ever? I have a story and also a question, and it's about faith and trusting. I had for many years heard this same premise about trust and the universe will provide, and it wasn't my thinking or something that I lived by. And about 10 years ago, I had 2 careers, and I decided I was sick of just doing the one to make money, and I was just going to do the one and trust that the universe, and I had been making a lot of money and got to the point where I had used up every credit card, but I was still trying the trust and the universe will provide, and I was trying to do that, and literally got to the point where I'd used up every credit card, had no money to buy food, and I was in New York City, and I didn't have the luxury of a family that, you know, taught me about camping, and so it was very scary. I didn't have those skills. And I don't feel like that worked for me. And I always wondered, what did I do wrong? I mean, I literally got to the point, which was hugely embarrassing for me and the values that I had grown up with, that someone told me that in New York City that there's actually churches that have food pantries. And I rode my bicycle over and got some food. And, you know, have you ever... You're telling a story that is, and you're living a life that is the true trust, but are you familiar with other scenarios that it doesn't work and why?
Most of the early 90s I felt that, like I felt like I was like the most cynical, bitter person in the world. Like just nothing works out. In fact, Murphy's Law was the law of the universe in my mind, and it seemed almost coincidental, the bad things that just kept happening. You know, and I felt like, wow, I'm either an atheist, there's no God, or if there is a God, he's the devil, you know, and watching the world situation too. But I feel like sometimes it just takes hitting bottom. And I've found, like, I've hit bottom quite a few times in my life. And a lot of times I've forgotten after the fact. But I find when you hit bottom and you find out you have nothing, and everything that you think is yourself is gone, that there's a flash of light, and you know, you discover your true self, and that true self is powerful, and that's the divine. And that's, I don't know, that's the mystery of suffering. But I feel like I have no right to tell somebody, you know, you need to have more faith. It's like you're suffering because of your own fault. I can't go to Somalia and talk to some starving mother and her skeleton baby. You know, you need to have faith. All I can do is just live my own life. What I know brings me peace. And the rest is a mystery to me. And if my living my life in a peaceful way brings inspiration and can help others, then that's all I can say and do. But I can't. I'm not good at giving advice for other people.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much.